Graham Jensen adjusted the strap of his worn-out backpack and glanced down at his 7-year-old daughter, Zoe, who was skipping beside him, humming a tune. "You ready for another adventure, kiddo?" he asked, ruffling her curly brown hair. Zoe grinned up at him. "Always," Graham chuckled, but his smile didn't quite reach his tired eyes. He had been working double shifts at the auto shop, barely scraping by. Ever since his wife walked out on them, it had been just him and Zoe against the world. But no matter how tight money was, he always made time to show her the little joys their small town had to offer: free museum days, hidden parks, and the best ice cream stand that didn't charge an arm and a leg. Today, though, their adventure would be a little different. A woman stood near the town's visitor center, looking utterly lost. She was tall, with flowing dark hair, dressed in simple jeans and a blouse, but there was something about her posture, poised yet uncertain, that made her stand out. Zoe tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, she looks like she needs help." Graham hesitated. He wasn't in the habit of approaching strangers, but the woman seemed genuinely confused. With a sigh, he stepped forward. "Need some help, ma'am?" The woman turned, her deep brown eyes locking onto his. There was a flicker of relief on her face. "Yes, actually, I just got into town and realized I have no idea where anything is." Her voice was smooth, confident, but warm. Graham nodded. "Well, you're in luck. I give the best unofficial town tours." Zoe beamed. "He really does," the woman laughed softly. "Then I'd love a tour. I'm Dahlia Brooks, by the way." Graham extended a calloused hand. "Graham Jensen, and this is my little sidekick, Zoe." Dahlia shook his hand, her grip firm but gentle. "Nice to meet you both." Graham didn't know it yet, but the woman standing before him wasn't just another tourist. She was a billionaire, one of the wealthiest women in the country, and she had come to this small town looking for something money couldn't buy. Graham led Dahlia and Zoe through the heart of town, pointing out places with a mix of pride and nostalgia. "That diner over there, best pancakes you'll ever have, and that bookstore, the owner lets you sit and read as long as you want." Dahlia listened intently, absorbing every detail. She had been to the grandest cities in the world, yet there was something charming about this place, something grounded and real. "So, what brings you here?" Graham asked as they walked through the park. Dahlia hesitated. "Just wanted a change of pace." "I've been so caught up in work that I forgot what it's like to slow down." Graham nodded. "Yeah, I get that. Life moves fast. Sometimes you gotta step back." Zoe suddenly gasped. "Oh, can we show her the wishing bridge?" Dahlia arched a brow. "Wishing bridge," Graham chuckled. "It's just a little footbridge over the creek. Legend says if you make a wish while tossing a pebble in, it'll come true." Dahlia smiled. "Sounds magical." When they reached the bridge, Zoe eagerly handed Dahlia a small stone. "Make a wish." Dahlia held the stone in her palm, thinking carefully before tossing it into the water. Graham watched her, curious. "What you wish for?" Dahlia glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "If I tell you, it won't come true." Graham shrugged. "Fair enough." As the sun began to set, he realized how much he had enjoyed the day. It had been a while since he had spoken to someone outside of work or Zoe's school. And Dahlia, there was something about her. "Thank you for showing me around," Dahlia said as they returned to the visitor center. "I didn't expect to have such a wonderful day." Graham gave a small smile. "Anytime." Zoe tugged at Dahlia's sleeve. "Will we see you again?" Dahlia hesitated for only a second before nodding. "I'd like that." As she walked away, Graham had no idea just how much their paths were about to intertwine. The next morning, Graham was under the hood of an old pickup truck at the auto shop when a shadow fell over him. Wiping his hands on a rag, he turned to find Dahlia standing there, watching him with an amused expression. "You again," he said, arching a brow. "You did say anytime," she replied smoothly. He chuckled, tossing the rag onto his workbench. "Fair enough." "What brings you here?" Dahlia glanced around the garage, taking in the stacks of tires, the faint scent of motor oil, and the radio playing an old rock song in the background. "I figured if I'm going to be in town for a while, I should get familiar with more than just the tourist spots." Graham leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. "So you decided to start with a greasy auto shop," she shrugged. "I like seeing people in their element." He studied her for a moment. There was something about her that didn't quite fit with the usual visitors that passed through town. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, yet she seemed genuinely intrigued by the simplest things. "What do you do, Dahlia?" he asked. She hesitated just long enough for him to notice. Then, with a small smile, she answered, "I run a business." "What kind of business?" "A big one." Graham narrowed his eyes slightly. "That's vague." She tilted her head playfully. "You didn't ask for specifics." He let out a short laugh. "All right, fair enough, you hungry? There's a food truck down the street that makes a mean breakfast burrito." Dahlia's eyes lit up. "Lead the way." They grabbed their food and found a bench in the town square, where people bustled about, greeting one another like old friends. Dahlia unwrapped her burrito, taking a tentative bite before her eyes widened. "Okay," she said, pointing at him with her food, "you are not exaggerating, this is incredible." "Told you," Graham said, taking a bite of his own. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment before she spoke again. "Tell me about your work." Graham exhaled, thinking, "It's steady." "Pays the bills, mostly. Been fixing cars since I was a teenager, one of the few things I'm good at." Dahlia frowned slightly. "You say that like it isn't valuable," he shrugged. "It's not glamorous, but it's honest." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Honest work is underrated." Graham looked at her then, really looked at her. She wasn't like anyone he'd met before. Most people who passed through town weren't interested in the lives of the people who lived there. But Dahlia was. Before he could say anything else, a familiar voice called out. "Dad!" Zoe came running up, her backpack bouncing behind her. Graham caught her in a quick hug before she turned to Dahlia with an expectant look. "You came back," Zoe said, grinning. Dahlia smiled warmly. "I did." Zoe plopped down beside her, swinging her legs. "Are you staying forever?" Graham chuckled. "Easy there, kiddo." Dahlia laughed too, shaking her head. "I don't know about forever, but I'll be here a little while longer." Zoe looked thoughtful. "Then you should come to the town fair tomorrow." "It's the best day of the whole year." Dahlia glanced at Graham, as if checking whether she should accept the invitation. He shrugged. "Well, if the kid says it's the best day, then it probably is." Dahlia turned back to Zoe with a grin. "I guess I'll have to go then." Zoe cheered, and just like that, Dahlia was no longer just a passing visitor. She was becoming part of their world. The town fair was in full swing when Dahlia arrived the next evening. String lights hung from trees, kids ran around clutching cotton candy, and the scent of popcorn and fried dough filled the air. Graham spotted her immediately. She had traded her usual blouse and jeans for a casual sundress that somehow made her look even more effortless. Zoe beamed when she saw her. "Come on, you have to see the games." Dahlia let herself be dragged along, laughing as Zoe excitedly pointed out every booth. Graham followed, watching the way Dahlia interacted with his daughter. She wasn't just humoring her, she was genuinely having fun. When they reached the ring toss, Zoe pouted, "I can never win this one." Graham ruffled her hair. "It's tricky, but I believe in you." Zoe tried, but the rings kept bouncing off the bottles. Dahlia watched for a moment, then stepped up beside her. "Mind if I give it a shot?" Zoe nodded eagerly. Dahlia picked up a ring, studied the distance, then tossed it with a flick of her wrist. It landed perfectly around the bottle's neck. Zoe gasped. "Whoa, how did you do that?" Dahlia winked. "A little practice." Graham folded his arms. "Something tells me you've done this before," she laughed. "Maybe once or twice." The booth operator handed her a stuffed bear, and without hesitation, she gave it to Zoe. "For me?" Zoe asked, eyes wide. Dahlia nodded. "Of course." Zoe hugged the bear tightly. "You're the best." Graham felt something shift in his chest. Watching Dahlia with Zoe, seeing how easily she fit into their lives, it stirred something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. As the night wore on, they rode the Ferris wheel, played more games, and ate too much fair food. At one point, as they wandered past a live band playing in the square, Dahlia looked at Graham. "Do you dance?" he scoffed. "Not well." She offered her hand. "Come on, just one dance." Zoe nudged him. "You have to, it's the rules." Graham sighed, shaking his head with a grin. All right, all right." He took her hand, feeling a strange thrill as their fingers intertwined. She led him onto the makeshift dance floor where other couples swayed to the music. As they moved, Dahlia looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "This has been the best night I've had in a long time," Graham swallowed. Yeah, me too. For the first time in years, he let himself forget about the struggles, the exhaustion, the constant worry. For the first time, he let himself enjoy the moment. And as Dahlia smiled up at him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between them, something he wasn't ready to name just yet. Graham hadn't planned to see Dahlia again so soon, but the next afternoon, he found her standing outside the auto shop, leaning casually against the rusted railing. Sunlight caught in her loose waves, and for a split second, he found himself momentarily thrown off by how effortlessly she fit into his world even though he knew she didn't belong to it. "You lost again?" he asked, stepping out and wiping his hands on a shop rag. She grinned. "Not this time." "I actually came to ask for a favor." Graham rested his hands on his hips. "That's so," Dahlia nodded. "I need a crash course in small-town life. I want to see what a day in your shoes is really like." He lifted a brow. "You sure about that?" "It ain't all Ferris wheels and breakfast burritos." She crossed her arms, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I can handle it." Graham shook his head, half amused, half skeptical. "All right. But don't say I didn't warn you." He led her to his truck, an old but reliable beast he had rebuilt himself. Dahlia slid into the passenger seat, tracing a finger along the cracked dashboard. "You've had this a long time." "Since I was 19, fixed it up myself." She glanced at him. "You're good with your hands." His grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. "Comes with the job." They drove out to the edge of town, where a small farm sat nestled beyond rolling fields. Graham pulled up beside a weathered barn and hopped out. Dahlia followed, her heels sinking slightly into the dirt. "You ever fed chickens before?" he asked, grabbing a bucket of grain. Her lips twitched in amusement. "Not exactly." He handed her the bucket, watching as she hesitated before tossing a small handful toward the eager birds. When they swarmed around her feet, she let out a surprised laugh. "They're more aggressive than I expected. They don't mess around when food's involved." She tossed another handful, then looked at him with a teasing glint in her eye. "Kinda like you and breakfast burritos." Graham huffed a laugh. "Fair." They moved on to the stables, where he showed her how to brush down an old mare named Daisy. Dahlia was hesitant at first, but as she ran the brush along the horse's coat, her movements became more confident. "This is peaceful," she admitted. Graham leaned against the stall. "That's why I come here when I need to clear my head." She looked at him then, something soft in her expression. "Do you ever think about leaving, trying life somewhere else?" He considered her question. "Maybe once." "But I got Zoe, and she's happy here. Stability matters more than chasing something new." Dahlia nodded as if she understood, but there was something unreadable in her gaze. They loaded hay bales onto the truck next, and Graham couldn't help but be impressed when Dahlia didn't complain about the dirt or the work. By the time they were done, she had dust streaked across her jeans and a few strands of hay in her hair. She wiped her forehead dramatically. "So did I pass the test? Am I officially small-town approved?" Graham pretended to consider. "You didn't cry over the chickens, so I'd say you did all right." She laughed, pushing his shoulder lightly. "I'll take it." As they drove back into town, Dahlia rolled down the window, letting the warm breeze ruffle her hair. She looked relaxed in a way he hadn't seen before. "You know," she said after a moment, "I think people underestimate this kind of life. They assume excitement only exists in big cities, but there's something real here, something grounding." Graham glanced at her. "Not what you're used to, huh?" She shook her head. "Not even close." He didn't push for details, though part of him wanted to. Instead, he let the silence settle, comfortable and easy between them. By the time they reached the shop, Zoe was waiting outside, her arms crossed impatiently. "You didn't tell me you were going on an adventure without me." Dahlia grinned, stepping out of the truck. "I had to prove myself first, but next time you're coming with us." Zoe's eyes lit up. "Promise? Promise." Graham watched the exchange, something stirring in his chest. He had kept his world small for so long, unwilling to let anyone in. But Dahlia was slipping through the cracks, whether he was ready for it or not. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure he minded. The late summer air carried the scent of fresh rain as Graham walked toward the small cafe where Dahlia had asked to meet him. It had been days since their last outing, and though he wouldn't admit it out loud, he had missed her presence. Inside, he spotted her instantly. She was seated by the window, gazing out at the street with an expression he couldn't quite place. When she turned and saw him, something flickered across her face, relief maybe, or hesitation. He slid into the seat across from her. "You all right?" Dahlia traced the rim of her coffee cup before offering a small smile. "Yeah, just thinking." He leaned back, studying her. "That sounds dangerous." She let out a short laugh, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Graham's stomach tightened. "That usually doesn't mean good news." Dahlia took a breath, as if steadying herself. "I haven't been completely honest with you." His jaw tensed slightly. He didn't say anything, just waited. She placed her hands flat on the table, then looked him straight in the eye. "I'm not just passing through town, and I'm not just running a business. I own one of the largest investment firms in the country." Silence stretched between them. Graham stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. He had suspected she wasn't an ordinary tourist, but this was something else entirely. "You're a billionaire." His voice was even, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. "Yes." He let out a breath, shaking his head slightly. The woman who had spent the day feeding chickens, stacking hay bales, and dancing with him at a town fair was also someone who probably had a private jet waiting for her at any given moment. Dahlia searched his face. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want it to change things. I liked being here without all of that, without people treating me differently." Graham exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "And now you think I will?" She hesitated. "Most people do." He let out a dry laugh. "Dahlia, I don't care how much money you have. I care that you didn't think you could tell me." Her shoulders dropped slightly. "I was afraid it would ruin this, whatever this is between us." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "You think some extra zeros in your bank account changes that?" Dahlia searched his face, as if trying to find any trace of resentment or distance, but there was none. "I don't know," she admitted. "You tell me." Graham studied her for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "I won't lie, it's a lot to take in, but you're still you. That hasn't changed." Her fingers curled slightly against the tabletop. "So, what now?" He tilted his head, considering. "Now we finish our coffee. And then we figure out what this means for us." A slow, relieved smile spread across her face. "You make it sound simple." He gave her a pointed look. "Maybe it is." Something shifted in her expression, then like the weight of the world had been lifted, if only a little. The conversation had changed everything, and yet somehow nothing at all. The following evening, Graham stood outside his house, hands shoved into his pockets as he watched Zoe chase fireflies in the backyard. His thoughts kept circling back to Dahlia, to the way she had looked at him when she told the truth. Vulnerable, hopeful, he hadn't expected her wealth to matter so little to him, but the truth was, it didn't. The woman who had spent afternoons laughing with his daughter and walking barefoot through the creek was the same woman, no matter the number in her bank account. A car pulled up to the curb, and when Dahlia stepped out, he felt something tighten in his chest. She wasn't dressed in anything extravagant, just jeans and a soft sweater, but she looked radiant in the glow of the setting sun. She hesitated before walking toward him. "I wasn't sure if I should come." Graham met her gaze. "I'm glad you did." She let out a breath. "Me too." Zoe came running up then, eyes bright. "Dahlia, come catch fireflies with me." Dahlia smiled, crouching to Zoe's height. "I'd love to." As she ran off with Zoe into the yard, Graham watched them, something warm settling in his chest. Dahlia glanced back at him, a question in her eyes. He nodded once. And just like that, the unspoken tension between them eased. Whatever this was, it hadn't changed. And maybe, just maybe, it was only the beginning. Graham leaned against the wooden railing of his porch, watching as Zoe and Dahlia darted across the yard, their laughter echoing in the warm night air. The fireflies flickered like tiny lanterns, illuminating the space between them. Dahlia knelt, cupping her hands around one of the glowing insects before gently releasing it, her expression one of pure delight. He hadn't expected her to come back after revealing the truth about her life. A part of him had thought she might decide their worlds were too different, that she would go back to wherever she truly belonged. But here she was, chasing fireflies with his daughter, looking more at ease than he had ever seen her. Zoe finally flopped down onto the grass, breathless. That was the most we've ever caught, she turned toward Dahlia. You're really good at this, Dahlia laughed, settling beside her. I guess I just had the right teacher. Graham stepped down from the porch, walking toward them. You two planning on staying out here all night? Zoe grinned up at him. Maybe, Dahlia stretched her legs out, leaning back on her hands. It's tempting, it's peaceful out here. Graham sat down next to her, the scent of summer rain still lingering in the air. No fireflies where you're from. There are, she said softly, but I never took the time to notice them. His gaze flickered to her, watching as she looked up at the sky. There was something wistful in her expression, something that made him wonder just how much of her life had been spent moving too fast to enjoy the little things. Zoe let out a long yawn, curling up with the stuffed bear Dahlia had won for her at the fair. Graham gently lifted her into his arms. I should get her to bed. Dahlia stood with him. I should probably head back. He hesitated. You don't have to rush off. She met his gaze, something unreadable passing between them. All right. I'll stay a little longer. Graham carried Zoe inside, tucking her beneath the blankets before returning to find Dahlia standing by the porch steps, arms wrapped loosely around herself. You know, she said, her voice quieter now, I don't think I ever told you why I came here in the first place. He leaned against the railing, waiting. My father built his company from nothing, she continued. He raised me to do the same, to work harder, push further, never slow down. And I did. I took over after he retired, and it became my whole life. She exhaled, shaking her head. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what I was working for. Graham studied her. So you came here to remember, she nodded. I didn't realize how much I needed to until I met you. Until I met Zoe. His chest tightened at her words, at the quiet honesty in them. Dahlia turned to face him fully. I don't want to go back to the way things were before. He held her gaze. Then don't. A slight breeze moved between them, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Dahlia reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. When I first got here, I thought I was just looking for a break, she admitted. But now I know I was looking for something real. Graham's thumb brushed over her knuckles. You found it, she smiled, but there was something almost hesitant in it. But what happens when my world catches up to me? He squeezed her hand gently. Then we figure it out, together. For the first time in a long time, Dahlia felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of everything alone. And for the first time in an even longer time, Graham let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, love had found him exactly when he needed it most. Dahlia stood on Graham's porch, the warmth of his hand still lingering against her skin. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the fireflies had begun their quiet dance once more. But for the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about her next move, her next deal, or the weight of her responsibilities. She was thinking about him. About the way he looked at her like she was more than just a name or a title. She let out a steady breath. I should probably head back. Graham, leaning against the railing, tilted his head slightly but didn't let go of her hand. You sure? She hesitated. No. His lips quirked up just slightly, not in amusement, but in understanding. Then don't. The simplicity of his words sent something warm through her chest, but before she could respond, the distant hum of an approaching car disrupted the quiet. Dahlia turned, her stomach tightening when she recognized the sleek black vehicle pulling up to the curb. Graham straightened, his gaze flickering toward her. You expecting company? Dahlia already knew who it was, and she wasn't ready for this. The car door swung open, and a tall man in a crisp navy suit stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks with precise movements. His sharp gaze landed on her immediately. Dahlia, she exhaled sharply. Elliot. Graham's posture shifted, his expression unreadable as he glanced between them. The tension was immediate, palpable. Elliot stepped forward with the ease of a man who was used to commanding attention. You've been ignoring my calls. Dahlia crossed her arms. I wasn't aware that required an explanation. His jaw tightened. Your absence is causing problems. The board is starting to ask questions. Graham remained silent, but she could feel his presence beside her, steady and unyielding. Dahlia lifted her chin. I told you I needed time. Elliot's gaze flickered toward Graham before returning to her. Time for what? Playing house. Graham's shoulders tensed, but Dahlia placed a hand on his arm before he could react. She turned back to Elliot with a calm she didn't entirely feel. "This isn't your business." Elliot's expression hardened. "It is when the company you're supposed to be running is being left in limbo." Dahlia inhaled slowly. "I built that company from the ground up. I've given it everything, and for once I'm taking something for myself." Elliot's mouth pressed into a thin line. "So that's it. You're throwing it all away for," Graham cut in, his voice even but firm. "You should leave." Elliot turned to him with a sharp look. "And you are," Graham didn't flinch, "the man who isn't going to let you stand here and disrespect her." Dahlia felt her pulse quicken. She had spent years surrounded by people who only saw her as a business asset, a name on a list of powerful individuals. But Graham saw her, just her. Elliot exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "This is a mistake, Dahlia." She met his gaze without wavering. "Then it's mine to make." A moment of silence stretched between them before Elliot finally sighed and turned back toward the car. "The board is expecting an answer. Don't take too long." The car door shut with a definitive thud, and then he was gone, leaving only the weight of what had just transpired. Graham turned to her. "You okay?" She let out a slow breath. "I don't know." He studied her for a beat before speaking. "You don't owe them your whole life, Dahlia." For so long, her life had been dictated by expectations, by obligations she had never questioned. But standing here with him, she realized something. "I don't want to go back," she admitted, her voice quiet but firm. Graham's gaze softened. "Then don't." Her breath hitched slightly. "It's not that simple." He took a step closer, his hands settling gently on her arms. "It could be." She looked up at him, at the sincerity in his eyes, and something inside her shifted. For the first time in forever, she wanted to choose something just because it made her happy. And Graham made her happy. "I don't want to lose this," she whispered. His hands tightened slightly. "You won't." The space between them disappeared as he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that felt like a promise of something real, something lasting. And for the first time in her life, Dahlia let herself believe in it. Months later, the town's autumn festival was in full swing, the air crisp with the scent of cinnamon and roasted apples. Dahlia stood near the small wooden bridge where she had once made a wish, watching as Zoe twirled in a pile of leaves with unrestrained joy. Graham stepped up beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "She's got more energy than both of us combined." Dahlia laughed, leaning into him. "She keeps us young." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Then slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. "I never planned on falling for someone like you," he admitted, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "But I did. And I don't want a life without you in it." Her heart pounded as he flipped open the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring. "Marry me, Dahlia." Tears pricked at her eyes as she looked at him, at the man who had shown her what it meant to truly live. "Yes," she whispered. A wide grin broke across his face as he slid the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a deep, lingering kiss. Zoe's delighted squeal broke them apart. "Does this mean I get to call you my stepmom now?" Dahlia laughed, scooping Zoe into her arms. "I'd be honored." As the festival continued around them, Dahlia looked at Graham, her heart full. She had spent her whole life chasing success, but it was here, in this small town, with this man and this little girl, that she had finally found everything she had ever needed. And she wasn't letting it go.